is Michael Laine. I'm the president of Liftport Group, and thanks for being a part of our show today. As you know, we've been doing these for a little over 4 months now, twice a week, and we kind of rotate through a couple different formats. We've tried some news stuff, we've tried some policy stuff, and we really try to get new guests in on a pretty frequent basis. So. Uh, I told you last week, this time, that I was going to be gone to Washington, D.C. this week, so I wasn't sure what the program was going to look like. Turns out, much to my surprise, I did not go to D.C., so that was a little chaotic. Hats off to the folks that did. I'll report back on what they accomplished next week once I learn it. They're still in DC right now. They were doing some work on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, going up to Capitol Hill, meeting congressmen and senators, most likely their aides, the congressional aides. Uh, Fun side note, basically the fate of America rests in some very dedicated but young, usually between 22 and 28 years old, dedicated staffer team. These folks basically run Washington, D.C., and run the schedules for the congressmen and senators that we appoint. So, hats off to those folks that do amazing work. Usually you don't get to interact directly with the congressmen and senators. It's usually a staffer who then condense, the hour that we spend with them into a 3-minute soundbite that's digestible. So hats off to them and the rest of the folks doing the March storm out in DC. I'll learn what I can and report back to you all next week. Today is kind of a combination of news, and I thought maybe I would share a peek behind the curtain, if you will, of Liftport. We're doing a lot of interesting stuff. We just got one small award, just shy of $4,000. So that was pretty neat. We'll be doing some work on our website and social media work and some marketing as a result of SpaceWorks Tacoma. So thanks a lot to SpaceWorks Tacoma for that new contract. We have a bid into the Small Business Administration right now. We have our fingers crossed about that. We won't know about that for another probably six or 8 weeks. They said April, but I am skeptical of that date. And then we've got a couple other projects that we're working on, both business development, to do more shows like this, more podcasting as a service for the space industry. So that's been exciting. We've had some pretty cool conversations about that. I think we're going to be adding a new show, so that's neat. And it will be very different from what we do with the Mars Society and the Red Planet Live. But if things go the way I want them to, it should be a pretty neat show. So as we get confirmation on that, I'll share it with you as soon as we have it. There's a couple other pieces of biz dev work that we've got, in the various pipelines to get projects together. And one thing I want to talk about tonight is getting back to the business of building an elevator on the moon. I was very fortunate to have a long, I have a long and somewhat storied relationship with Rick Tomlinson. Tomlinson's probably most well known now for his work on the Space Fund. He was a co-founder of Space Fund. Prior to that, he was co-founder of one of the asteroid mining companies. There have been a couple. This one was pretty famous. It was one of the folks that was kind of leading the charge on the asteroid development. Prior to that, he was part of the lunar program commercialization. Prior to that, he was a part of all the space cowboys that were trying to do commercial development of the Soviet era space station called Mir. That's an amazing story. And prior to that, he was a co-founder of the Space Frontier Foundation. So I have a long history with Rick. He's a terrific guy. I consider him both a peer and a mentor, just because, you know, if there's something I need to know about the industry and where the bodies are buried and some of the stuff on Capitol Hill, he's just a wealth of information. I'm reminded that the space company, the asteroid mine company that he was started was Deep Space Industries, and that's correct. Yeah, thank you. So he is running a show somewhat similar to ours on iRock Radio. It's part of the iHeart Radio network. And it's called Space Revolution. And he's been doing that for about the same amount of time as we've been doing our show. It's kind of had a parallel track. And so he had me on as a guest for his show a couple of days ago. And during it, we were talking a lot about my own history, both as a contractor on the NASA Institute for Advanced Concepts project, and then for the space elevator, and then my own work at Liftport, working on materials for the space elevator, working on robotics for the space elevator. It was a good interview. It was a good interview. It was a good conversation. But if you've watched any of these shows, I really want to get back into the business of working on the lunar space elevator infrastructure. Like, that's really important to me. And I know we did what we had to do during the last 3 years of the pandemic, and the plague changed everything for many people in the world. And I'm grateful for the pivots that we were able to make in order to just keep things going. But one of the conversations that Tomlinson and I had, coming from the perspective of a guy who's wearing the space fund hat, figuratively and literally, he's like, look, the industry is ready for your kind of project, for our kind of project. That there are people that have been waiting for the first phase of rocketry and satellites to run its course, and arguably it has. We're very good at rockets. We're very good at satellites now. And so the next phase is going to be space tugs. It's going to be lunar development. There's going to be little pushes out towards Mars. I think it's farther away than other people do in terms of time. But one of the things he said was that, look, there are people that are waiting for this first stage to run its course, and they're looking for the second thing, the next thing. And that our elevator on the moon, especially because of its Lagrange point station, especially the conversations we've had about we refer to it as a fort at the top of two hills. And Tomlinson's been a fan of mine for a long time, and I'm a fan of him. I've spoken on many stages that he has access to, the New Worlds Conference, the Space Frontier Foundation meetings, things like that. But he told me something the other day. He's like, I've always kind of been skeptical of the Earth elevator, but once you started working on the moon, and we've been working on it for more than a decade now. He said, once you started working on the moon, you had my attention. And I have the honor of knowing the chief scientist of U.S. Space Force, and I introduced Tomlinson to Dr. Mosier about 4 years ago. And I was telling him that story about how Mosier, and the rest of his team evaluate our stuff. And so, it's funny because he really respects me and he really respects Mosier, and that pair of, credible sources, so to speak, really was intriguing to him. He's like, I hadn't given as much thought to the lunar elevator as you have, but I've definitely sparked made a light bulb go off in his head, and that was really cool. I was really happy to do that. He's known generally what we were doing for a long time, but we never had a really specific conversation about it. So this was really useful. I was very happy about that. So I want to get back into the work of working on a lunar elevator. We're not going to abandon what we've done on Bare Futures. This show is important to us. The conferences that we've done, that we're going to continue to do, they're important to us. But then how do we get back into the work of working on the elevator on the moon? And so that's been this tightrope that I've been working on walking for a while now. And I think there's some paths. I think there are some paths. So just kind of stick with us on that. We'll get there as quickly as we can. For today's show, I kind of want to just peel back things a little so you see a little bit about the stuff that we're doing, why we're doing what we're doing, and just share with you some of the wide ranges of emails that we get at Liftport. And I'm not going to show everything, and some of it's wackadoo crazy, but some of it's pretty interesting. So let me do a couple screen shares here. And we'll talk about the pieces here. So there's this one. The U.S. Army seeks novel technology capabilities to help achieve modernization goals. So we get messages from the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Marines. Not as much about the Marines as I would like, actually, but I got to be loyal to my former service members. While it was not my favorite job in the world being a Marine, I was super proud about being there. But this is something, we get messages like this all the time. How do we submit something? And in this case, it's not really a terrific fit. The Army is trying to expand the ability to experiment, evolve, and deliver technologies in real time to address both urgent and emerging threats. All right, so we've talked before about our tethered towers capabilities, which was our testing platform. So we had high altitude balloons tethered to the ground with robots climbing back and forth. We built that system as a test platform for the mechanical processes of climbing. Along the way, we realized that there's a lot of value in being higher than everything else around you. So we went as high as a mile for about 6 hours, and we went as long as 60 days, but we were only about 300 feet at that time. So that pair, we call it HAIL, high altitude, long endurance, we were working towards being at higher altitudes for longer periods of time when the first version of Liftport collapsed back in 2007. So now, fast forward, the government is looking into different tools to help the warfighter from the Pentagon, right? And so then my question, the question that always comes to me is, how do we fit lunar elevator research into something that the government's already willing to pay? So how do we shoehorn our technical goals into something that the government wants to pay for? And so it's not easy. It's not easy. And so we have a meeting coming up here with some folks in the Navy that are interested in our balloons communications platform. And is this a result of the Chinese spy surveillance balloon platform a couple weeks ago? Absolutely, absolutely. So we'll strike while the iron's hot and see if we can get somebody's attention. But this is the kind of email that comes through on a pretty frequent basis. And then let me show you another one. You've heard me mention before the Space Industrial Base meeting. They host it every year, the last 4 years down in New Mexico, in Albuquerque. They're hosting a special event called a breakout session here in the Seattle region in April, so I'll definitely be attending that. My friends over at Space Northwest are hosting it, so I'm pretty happy about that. But this is the kind of thing that we get invited to on a pretty frequent basis, which is why I thought I was going to Washington, D.C., because we were invited to do something else, but that plan didn't really work out. But New Space New Mexico has been hosting these meetings for the Space Industrial Base for most of the last 4 years. Their work in doing these site-specific breakout sessions, I think, is really intriguing. I think that gives the more weight to their report. Their report has a lot of weight. Let me be very clear. Their report has a lot of weight in Washington, D.C. The signatories, 2 years ago, the year I was cited for Starship Singularity, the authors were Air Force Research Lab, Air Force Space Command, and Defense Innovation Unit. And then the 2 people that signed it were General Raymond, the chief officer of the most senior officer, 4-star general at Space Force, and Administrator Nelson, former Senator Nelson at NASA. And you could argue that these folks represent some of the largest budgets in all of space. So this industrial space-based document you've heard me talk about many times before has real weight when it comes to folks in DC. And the recommendations that go into it are super important. So they're going to host a set of regional breakout meetings. And I think that's pretty interesting. Up here in Seattle, because we are the small satellite capital of the world. We build not quite half of the world's satellites right now, but pretty close. And probably by next year we'll surpass that. So we probably are building close to or more than half the world's satellites right now. Mostly because of SpaceX's Starlink system is built up here, but also OneWeb is on its way. Sorry, they're not building it here. Kuiper, Amazon's Kuiper system is being built here. So it's no surprise that they're going to have, the Internet of Space. It's that intersection between the hardware side of space and the digital cloud side of space, Seattle is the logical place for it. Going out to Cape Canaveral, of course, they're going to talk about launch, and then Mountain View, California is going to look at remote sensing. That makes a lot of sense. There are several remote sensing companies in that region. This one interesting one in Monterey, hosted on International Alliances Working Group. I think that's pretty interesting. Monterey, you may or may not know this. I lived in Monterey once when I was very young, 4th, 5th, and 6th grade. It has the Defense Language Institute run by the Navy or the Army? Defense Language Institute. Anyway, and because of that, my dad learned Korean at DLI when I was probably in the 5th grade. Because of that school being there 40 years ago, 45 years ago, over time, it has picked up a reputation for having a lot of really interesting international connections. And so that one was a little surprising. There are several think tanks that operate out of Monterey. There's a couple really important master's level schools, private schools in that area. So pretty interesting that they're going to have that program there. It's invitation only. The rest are all available to attend. So definitely put that on your radar if you want to start influencing. They're going to be really selective about who attends these things. So have your professional credentials ready. But it's an interesting program. So that's coming. This guy is great, by the way, General Buto. I think he's now retired. He was active duty when I met him just a few years ago. And the Defense Innovation Unit is all about getting advanced technology into the military service. So pretty interesting stuff there. I'm going to post a couple links here in the chat. Give me a second. I recommend everybody read these reports. I think they're super important. You've all heard me mention them before. And here's the registration if you're up in the Seattle area next month. Okay. Hey, Jason. I don't understand your question. What about a tethered lander? Could you be more specific with your question? Okay, I'm going to move on to the next piece I want to show you. And this is just a weekend email from Michael Laine. This one caught me off guard. By the way, I really like Payload as a company, as a news source. I'm going to post links to signing up for them. So you could argue that Payload is a quasi-competitor of Liftport. We do something somewhat similar, right? They're a news organization. Better Futures has a lot of news. We're not probably breaking news stories. We don't really have the resources to do that. And we're definitely not putting out a newsletter every single day like they are. Things that are similar is they're doing a once a month podcast, and it's probably moving to twice a month. We're doing 8 a month. That's really our outlet. We have considered doing newsletters. It's interesting. They have 16,000 subscribers to their channels. We probably have more than that if you add all of our channels together, but easily 8 or 10,000 in our newsletter, our email address alone. So we're not trying to compete with them. I really like what they're doing. They're well funded, they're well connected, they're doing good work. So I don't want to sit here and badmouth them, because in fact I'm actually pretty impressed by them. But a couple days ago, they had this article about who's going to buy United Launch Alliance. So that was a breaking story, maybe Wednesday, Thursday last week. I even talked about it in our show when I was talking about consequences of Starship Singularity. And they ran a poll. Payload ran a poll, basically saying, who's going to buy this thing, right? And they had 372 votes, and it looks like, Blue Origin, this industry, these 372 people, has 16,000, think that Bezos's company Blue Origin is going to be the one who buys ULA. And I said something similar on our show the other day. Is this a deeply scientific poll? No. But if you think there are pretty few nerds that are going to read a space industry news newsletter every single day, right? That's a pretty select group of nerds. And so knowing the demographics of the people who are reading this thing, that 88 people out of 372 picked Blue Origin, that's pretty cool. I would say there's a lot of strength behind that argument. But there's other choices here also. What I was surprised to see was, so they had some comments. It's going to be Blue Origin, it's going to be Lockheed. And these are comments from the audience, from the participants in the survey. And then there's a couple wild cards, right? Maybe it's going to be John Deere. But then this one, Payload is asking the wrong question. There's no single buyer. Once the analysis is complete, the conclusion will find that the liabilities of an expendable launch system are too great to compete with reusable launch systems. However, the elements like location, real estate, facilities, test, manufacturing, comms and tracking, and PNT, etc., are all individually valuable and will be bundled and auctioned separately to many specialist bidders. So the reason that I'm highlighting this is that this is my quote. Didn't get attribution. They didn't give attribution to any of these comments, but this is my quote. I wrote this, and it was pretty neat to see that this is going out to 16,000 people. I really wonder what the other 15,999 people thought when they read that. So I was pretty excited to see my quote made the headlines there. So pretty happy about that. So that's Payload. I really like it. It's a good source of industry news every single day. They focus primarily on the money of space. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing for a minute and come back to other stuff. So another thing that hit my email box, it actually was a couple of weeks ago, and I'm going to tell a little bit of a story. So this guy, Dr. Marcus Holsinger, wrote an article here. Whoops, sorry, wrong button. Holsinger wrote and now I cannot find it. Well, drat. So Holsinger is a professor at UC Boulder. I hope that everybody knows that there's a giant commercial ecosystem popping up at University of Colorado in Boulder. I have my own history with UC Boulder. I had a very bad day there once that changed the course of my life. But nonetheless, great school. And he's a professor there, and he's also a professor at Georgia Tech, also a terrific school I have a lot of good history with. I almost worked at Georgia Tech once. That would have been super fun. I really wanted to do that. So he has been writing all of these articles, right? And there's a lot of them. There's a lot of them. He writes a lot of stuff. The things that came to my attention first was this one. Space Power Theory Reading List. Now, I talked about this, I don't know, a couple weeks ago now. I'm going to grab some links here, post them in the chat. So Marcus, Professor Holsinger, he writes a lot on what does space power mean in the sense of military and national power and strategic power. And these books, if I was going to start a reading club, and I'm thinking about starting a reading club, a book club, I'd love to get some comments on that. I'm thinking about starting a book club, and he goes through all of these critical books on power, military power, specifically in space. And this reading list might take me a year, but I'm like, wow, this is really interesting stuff. And I have read several of these, and not this many, but I've read a lot of them. This one's fascinating, by the way, the Stallman one. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. This one's cool. So I have many of these, and most of these are available for free. Most of them are available for free. And so he goes through all of these books, and he kind of synthesizes them. And he always starts off with, I meant to write a short note, but I ran out of time, so here's a long one. I mean, he's kind of being sarcastic about that, but all of his documents wind up to be fairly long. I definitely find myself in this last group, this space control group. We've talked before about Blue versus Brown. It's military philosophies about nearshore versus deep ocean operations. I've had beer with Cody Smith. I've had Dr. Zarnick on my show. I've had Bradley Townsend on my show. I'd love to hire him. I've had Josh Carlson on my show probably 4 times. I've told all of my people that this document might be the most important document in America right now. So there's definitely, some interesting stuff here. And then these, well, I just said, Garrettson just wrote the first Starship Singularity document, and Namrata Goswami is going to be on our show in a week and a half. So pretty interesting. So that's how this guy came to my attention. Sorry, I didn't mean to go off into so much detail on this particular article. But that's how Holtzinger came to my attention. So I reached out to him, and we connected on LinkedIn, and I'm going to ask him to be on our show real soon. We have some other guests lined up. Raphael Rontgen, he's a venture capitalist out in Switzerland, and Namrata Goswami, Dr. Goswami is going to be on our guest, I think, next week. So we're trying to line up Holtzinger and a couple other folks here pretty soon. But he came to my attention through the friends, these folks down here in the control school. These people were all talking, and again, these are my friends. So these folks were talking about Holtzinger. I'm like, gosh, this guy is pretty interesting. So I reached out to him. So we're going to try to get him on the show. And then 2 weeks ago and the week before that, 2 and 3 weeks ago, he wrote up this thing on the cislunar tech strategy that the White House posted. So if y'all remember our team's show from, 6 weeks ago, this document came out, and we immediately started talking about it, because it's a really important document, and he goes into this whole thing. Again, I'm going to post all of these links here. But what is the national strategy? What makes it important? How do you build a national strategy? It's all about resources. What are the objectives? So if y'all will remember, I went through on video a lot of the same stuff that he went through in text format. So definitely want to read this. I think it's the future of space. And I really liked his analysis. So I was already impressed with him, and then I became more impressed because he did this. It's in 2 parts, and it is long. It's worth reading. The short version is it's about commercial development of the moon, and that's what the United States is doing. And it's pretty cool stuff. I'm definitely a fan. So I'm looking forward to chatting with him. These are the documents as posted by the White House. So they're worth reading. You see why I'm thinking about doing a book club, because everything that we're doing, there's just a lot of reading. There's just a lot of reading ahead of us. So, whoops, wrong link. So these documents, they came out about November. So we probably, our team probably, this might have been one of the first shows that we did, actually. So go back into our archive from either November or December, probably December. So Holtzinger is an interesting guy. The more I get to read him, the more interesting and kind of compelling his arguments are. So I was already interested, and then he pulls out this one. This one I think was, it's today. So this was today. And it basically says, this stuff is hard. This stuff is not easy. But it goes back a ways. So I'm just gonna leave this to y'all. I have not read this one, so this one was new to me. I'm going to see if I can go dig that one out. Isn't this the best logo? I've seen role-playing games from the 90s that have exactly this logo. I was pretty surprised by that. This was from a document from 1995, right? You know, to and from land, to and from the sea, going subsurface, subterranean. How do you get to the air? So this is how most of the world operates in warfare, right? You know, from air to air, from air to land, from air to sea, from sea to land, to sea to air, to sea to sea, from land to land, from land to air, from land to sea, right? That is how the world has operated for thousands of years of warfare. And then now we add in low Earth orbit, geosynchronous orbit, and the moon. One thing that I think is super important and missing in this document is right about here. I'd put the Lagrange point 1, EML1. Maybe I would put the other L points. I don't think 3 is particularly useful. EML3 is the one that's on the far side of the Earth, away from the moon. That one is pretty unstable, and there's not a lot of there's not a lot there right yet. There's not a lot of value to that one just yet. But L1 and L2, stabilized by a string, a tether to the moon, those become super interesting. And L4 and L5, well, let me say, L1, 2, and 3 are unstable because of the shake, the perturbation of the moon. So stuff that's at 1, 2, and 3 tends to fall back either to the Earth or to the moon. Whereas 4 and 5, as Tomlinson was describing the other day, are kind of like eddies in a pond. The gravity is still there, but it's being bounced back and forth between the Earth's gravity and the moon's gravity. But if you stabilize L1 and L2 using a tether, suddenly that becomes a really interesting place. So if I were to rewrite this 1995 document, I would put another little element here about L1. But again, you know, I don't know that a lot of people are really looking at you know, the warfare of space. And I don't want to be all, you know, end of the world stuff, but it's pretty interesting. So he does kind of expand it here. If you want to look at, you know, this is EML1, EML2, 3, 4, and 5. Here's the Earth, there's the moon. And you know, that dot in the middle is the center of mass, and then roughly. So this scale is yeah, it's and by the way, this line all the way around is sometimes referred to as the McLaine line, McLaine, after Major Sean McLaine, who he was far too bashful to take credit for it, but you need to have a name for a space, and there's precedent for it. There's a Kármán line. There's several lines in the solar system, and so there's one that encompasses all 5 L points. And the Earth-Moon Lagrange environment is sometimes called the McLaine line. Okay, so this is a pretty interesting there's a pretty interesting set of diagrams, pretty interesting set. It's worth reading. That's what I'm going to say. It's worth reading. And this is the kind of stuff that if you start paying attention to it, this is the kind of stuff that nations are going to argue about. And I mean, argue meaning they're going to use all of their tools, whether it's political, military, economic, whatever it is. This is going to be, in military terms, contested space. So just kind of watch that. So this article just came out today, so I'm going to recommend it. It's worth reading. It's worth kind of digging into. This is the future. You know, I don't care what you think about what's on television. I don't care what you think about what's on the news. I don't care if you're blue versus red. You know, this is the kind of stuff that nations are going to argue over. The governments are going to argue over it. Corporations are going to argue over it. The UN is already arguing over it. This is our future. It's going to be a bumpy ride. So hang on tight. And on that super cheery note, I'm going to move to a little bit of news. I don't think anybody's going to be surprised by this headline, but investors in space startups see hurdles in the defense market. Yeah, no kidding. By the way, Jordan Noon is one of the co-founders of Relativity Space. Relativity tried to launch this morning or late this afternoon. My team was sitting there on the screens watching. It was a pretty good teachable moment because you know, my team's trying to understand this new industry, so we were talking about, you know, how this stuff happens and everything. So that was fun. It was a good day. But Jordan left Relativity Space and became a venture investor. So pretty interesting. And basically he's saying, look, it's really hard to work with the military. And they want it to work. And I mentioned earlier the Defense Innovation Unit, AFWorks and SpaceWorks also are on-ramps to military tools. So they've made it pretty hard to work with the military. They are trying to make things better, but it is not easy. And if you consider that Space Force is about to have a budget almost, but not quite, almost as big as NASA. NASA's about 26 billion, and Space Force is about 25 billion. In the new next appropriations, it's looking to be about 25 billion dollars. So near, but not the same as NASA's. You know, it would be great if the military were able to take on the commercial technologies that are being created and become either anchor tenants or just buy services from the space industry. So I don't think anybody's going to be surprised that it's hard to do this stuff, but it is important to, you know that it's out there, that that yes, as fast as the industry is trying to go and as fast as the Pentagon is trying to streamline things, it's still really tricky. This is tricky stuff. You know, put that in perspective. You know, we are able to figure it out, but you've got a launch cadence from China, slightly more than 60 launches per year. The launch cadence of SpaceX, slightly more than 60 launches per year. By the way, let that sink in for a second, that one company has a launch cadence almost equal to the second largest economy in the world. So nice job, SpaceX, for that. But then with relativity coming online and Astra, even though the Astra is struggling, Rocket Lab definitely doing great with those folks. Sierra Space, Virgin, we have a large and growing infrastructure and space launch capabilities with different techniques, different mission parameters. We had on our show just last week Matthew Travis from Aphelion. These companies are trying really hard to be innovative and open channels for their particular payloads and cargo. But neither NASA nor Space Force nor Air Force nor anyone else have made it very easy for this industry to work with the biggest potential clients. So it's good to kind of have them called out on that a little bit. My friends and my classmates from ISU just raised $5 million for a lunar data center. Now that's been talked about in science fiction for 60 years, I think. If anyone ever read Moon is a Harsh Mistress, that sentient computer comes to life on the moon and manages the lunar civil war as the lunatics from the moon decide to rebel against the home planet of Earth. But it is a sentient computer on the moon that is the catalyst for the Lunar Rebellion. So Chris Stott and those folks over at Lone Star just raised $5 million to build the first test data center on the moon. They're going to launch up with intuitive machines, so that's basically imminent. That is pretty cool stuff. I am very happy. Side note, Chris Stott's wife is the astronaut Nicole Stott, and Chris has been in the space industry for about 30 years, might be only 25 years, but there are not a lot of people that predate me in this industry, not really very many. As an industry, I want to clarify, the folks at NASA definitely predate me, but as an industry, as a commercial sector, Chris Stott is definitely one of the earliest pioneers. So hats off to them for doing this. I hope that my dreams of a sentient lunar supercomputer come true and that this is the first step. And then one of the last things we're going to talk about is, do you have anything else? Yeah, that was the last thing we're going to talk about. How Middle Eastern ambitions are fueling the space industry. I was in a conversation a couple days ago with an airline pilot from Dubai. And he was telling me how he was at a club last week just hanging out because he was at a club. He's like, doing a layover in Dubai. I met him here in Seattle. It was the most random of conversations. And he was showing me a picture, and I had one of those, I know that guy moments, because he was showing me a picture of him and one of my former professors, Dr. Jim Green at ISU. He was the NASA's science mission director for something like 8 years of NASA's $26 billion budget. Jim Green was personally responsible for about 8 or 9 of that billion, 8 or 9 of that $1 billion project. And so budget, he was in charge of Martian missions. He was in charge of going out into deep space. So DART was his. All of these things were his. And so he's out in Dubai. I don't know what he's doing. I don't know. I just thought it was kind of a crazy coincidence. But here's the thing, right? Dubai has one of the strongest Martian programs, one of the more credible Martian programs in the world. They want to settle Mars. And they've got a long-term plan for it. And I was at a meeting in Washington, D.C. It was called the Heads of Agency meeting back in, 2013, 2014, perhaps. And 2014, the very beginning, January of 2014. And they had just decided to create a space agency, and they were going to go to Mars. And what are they going to do? And so they are using it in the same way that America and the Soviet Union used it. It was an upskilling program to inspire, to raise the standards, to raise STEM across the board. And it's fascinating how they're aiming for the moon. They're sending astronauts to space on commercial sector astronauts. Saudi Arabia is involved. The whole Middle East is trying to get to space. They are having to kind of figure out which role they're going to play. Are they going to play with the Americans or with the Chinese? But this was really fascinating. So America created the Artemis Accords. I think that there are 22 signatories on that. I'm actually not sure. I need to look that up. But the Saudi Arabians pulled out of the Moon Treaty. That was a pretty big deal. So this article talks about how the Moon Treaty was never a very significant document. The Soviets didn't sign it. The United States didn't sign it. The Saudis signed it just a year or two before the United Arab Emirates had created their space agency. And no one was talking about the moon back then. So it was interesting. So it's pretty cool to see how the space industry is really starting to have this global impact, global footprint. So I'm excited about this stuff. I didn't mean to leave it on an ad. That's kind of careless. Let's move off of that. I think this stuff is really neat. I love, this. The reason I went to ISU in the first place was, the internationalization of space, I think, is really important. Space done well is space done collaboratively. That's why I went to ISU in the first place. So it's neat to see, okay, on the one side, yes, we talked about a lot of tensions that are happening in space, and I think there's going to be more tension sooner. But I also, stuff like this really gives me hope, and the development of space agencies all over the continent of Africa. I think there's either 14 or 17 space agencies, either fully developed or in development in Africa. Africa has the potential to have an even stronger space industry than Europe. European Space Agency has been around for a long time, but arguably Africa, with its 54 nations, could potentially field a larger, more strong space, combined space agency than the European Space Agency. So it's neat to see this stuff starting to come together. I don't know where the Saudis or the Emiratis are going to wind up in the kind of political spectrum there, but that they're trying to build space programs is pretty encouraging to me. Okay, I think that's all I got for tonight. Jason, let me read your comment here. A non-anchored lift could also lift at different regions on the moon, just a different method of conveying the landers. Okay, so one of the things I said to Rick Tomlinson the other day was that we, Liftport, are going to the wrong place. Now, I'd like to flip that around and say the rest of the world is going to the wrong place and we are going to the right place. But there'd be a lot of people that push back on that. So what I mean by that is if you look dead on, if you lined up the center of the Earth and the center of the moon, the center of mass of both of those places, our string, our lunar elevator string, is going to basically fall along that line. And so that means that the landing site for our elevator, we call it LC, Lunar Space Elevator Infrastructure, LSEI, LC. LC is going to land at Sinus Midday. So if you're looking at the moon straight on, the 00 latitude, longitude spot of the moon, that's where we're going to place our elevator. And the rest of the world is really looking at the permanently shadowed craters of the moon down at Shackleton, down the South Pole, that area, because they think it's going to be really easy to get ice there, water ice, which turns into rocket fuel, turns into breathable atmosphere, turns into, for astronauts, turns into all sorts of stuff. So they want to go to the South Pole because they think there's more water ice there. Never mind that water is probably negative 400, negative 500 degrees, negative 300 degrees. It's really going to be hard to operate in that environment. So good luck to y'all. It's going to be tough. One of the other things that we talked about is, how do you get from Sinus Midday, where we're going to be, down to the poles? So that's going to be tricky. The other thing, and I think this is an underappreciated problem, all of that rocketry that's going to go to the moon, all of those are going to use propulsive landing. Hard to do. That's really hard to do. They're going to kick up a lot of dust, a big plume of dust. Every time a Blue Origin rocket lands, every time a SpaceX rocket lands, when Intuitive Machines lands in just a few months, they're going to have these giant plumes of debris. Tomlinson refers to them as flying razor blades because this stuff is super sharp and super dangerous. And so at some point, the ecosystem, and I'm going to use the word loosely, the atmosphere of the moon is going to have a hell of a lot of dust, flying razor blades in it. That's going to be a problem. It's going to be a problem fashion that people are paying attention to. So yeah, it's okay that they have continuous power down in the South Pole. I love that. That's fantastic. I understand why they're doing that. They're going to need all that power to keep you warm because it's really cold down there. So we're going to wind up going to Sinus Midday. It's just, from a physics perspective, it's just easier to do that. I think that all that dust that's kicked up from these these propulsive landings, it's going to be a problem faster than other people realize, and therefore it's going to limit just how much activity you can send to the moon. Because there's some calculations that say that that dust goes 30, 40, 50 kilometers into the sky. And no one knows that for sure. No, that's there's some strong guesswork and there's some good math behind it, but so far as I know, there's not evidence for that. So I think our lunar elevator has a role to play in mass cargo supplies to the moon. So I think the world is going to the wrong location, but I can't change where the world wants to go. So they're going to go for solar power. They're going to go for water ice. I think they've made that job a lot harder than it needs to be. But I'm glad they're going. And with that, I'm going to close out for the night. Thank you, everybody. Thank you especially to my team. Leah in the background, always terrific. Taylor doing some tweeting, Rachel writing, Yusuf and Fabio doing work on YouTube, my current intern, Jen, and we have a new intern. So this time next week on our show, we'll have a new intern. So I'm excited about that. Also coming in from Korea. So that'll be our second intern from Korea at the same time. So with that, everybody, thanks so much. We'll see you next week on Monday. All right, take care. Bye-bye.